Hello and welcome to Film Slam Stream's post-film conversation for Ambassadors of Hope. My name is Eric Siler, and I'm an instructor of film, media arts, and communications, as well as moderator for this conversation. We are very pleased to be joined by the co-directors of this film, Amber Allen-Peirson and Cassidy Friedman. Hello, Amber and Cassidy, and welcome.
Hello, thank you for
Hey,
having us.
This is just really, I just love it when the world feels smaller, in which filmmakers can go to different parts of the world and expose people here in this country to things that are going on in the world. So, Cassie, I understand you had a local connection in California, which brought this film to this organization to your attention. So, can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
yeah. Gloria Simino is a visionary, and her vision for what expressive arts and expressive arts therapy can mean for people comes from her own experience of feeling sort of invisible in her own life. And then tapping into the arts, and she kind of found a voice for herself. And it's an ongoing struggle, it's an ongoing struggle, but what's so amazing about Gloria is that she embodies the work. And so when she saw a previous film that I directed, which was about restorative justice, which is a different form of storytelling, and as a sort of a way of rewriting tragedy and sort of and breaking through to by sharing your story. She was like, she approached me. She's like, we have to do that. You wouldn't believe the stuff that we're working on in Nairobi, and also she's based in Nepal. And at one point she was in Haiti. So it didn't take a lot of convincing for me. And I'd been starting to work with Amber on some creative projects. And Amber, for me, like you said, the world feels sometimes very small. For me, it felt very big. Nairobi felt very far away. But Amber had done some work there, and so she had a sort of familiarity with the place. And so we kind of came together as this unit, as this storytelling unit. And that's kind of how the project got started, and how we were introduced to Samson, the main character, how we met the incredible team that works in Nairobi, and and uh and then we just did a whole bunch of pre-production beforehand, because we didn't want to show up sort of at any more deficits. We already had language issues, cultural barriers, so much to deal with. So building a relationship with Samson, a lot of that took place actually before we even got to Nairobi.
Okay, great. So, Amber, so when Cassidy told you about this, because of your connection with Kenya, you were immediately on board. So what happened next once Cassidy contacted you and you did your pre-production? You hopped on a plane to go over there, or what else took place? Continue the story.
Yeah, I was so happy and grateful to be invited. I consider Kenya like a second home. I've been there several times. The people are always friendly. The culture is always inviting. And I was excited to go and be there with this director who I admire so much and whose creativity I appreciate. And also, we work really well together when you're capturing other people's stories. It's always nice, I think, to have at least two people, both from a technical point of view, because sound and video at the same time can be really pressing. So I was able to do sound so that Cassidy could focus on the visuals, but also you're taking on a lot. You're taking on a lot emotionally when you take on someone's story. So it's really nice to have someone to bounce that off of when you are excited or overwhelmed or any of the things that come up. I think Cassidy and I do a really good job at space holding. And then, yeah, so we got there, we got to meet Samson, who, like Cassidy said, we developed a relationship with. And one of the things that that I think I'm really good at, I hope I'm considered really good at, is looking for the story inside of a person, or the story that's not always as obvious. I'm really good at asking the questions. And sometimes when you meet people and they know that there's a camera on them, they might tell you the story that they think you want to hear. And I'm really good at getting people to relax enough to open up and share the parts of us that they might not know as obviously are important, are what makes them relatable, are what makes them expressive about the human experience. So yeah, and I also just am inspired by Gloria and by the work that she's doing. It's an incredible thing to create such a big impact and a program across the world from here, and maintain it for all of these years and support so many people. So it was really, really impressive, and I was honored to be there.
Well, sticking with you, Amber, uh, in making this film, were you looking to make this for a global audience, or make it for Kenyans, or make it for an American audience? Because you have to think about, how this is going to be received, and how you're going to screen it. What was your thinking going into this?
So I will tell you what I was thinking, but I will give credit to Cassidy. Like, we were hired to emphasize the program. Cassidy, who I would call of a mentor in his style as a director, is really focused on the narrative, and the narrative being empowering. So what he did not want to do was go to Kenya and make a story about poor Kenyans and how they're struggling. It was really important to make an empowering story, of a coming of age story about this young man who has, who art has done a lot for, and who can use art to do a lot for his community. So I think that was the most critical part, is not emphasizing. A lot of time, particularly in Africa, I think films and stories are made to just only look at the deficit of a people. And Kenya and Nairobi and Kibera, which is where we were, are very rich communities with a lot to offer. And that's what we wanted to focus on.
Right. And what do you want to add to that, Cassidy?
I mean, she said it. I think the only thing I would add is that I don't get nervous showing the film to a big room full of people. I get nervous showing the film to the person whose story it is. Because that's the trust that I'm asking for. And that's the make or break. Have I done them a service? Have I added value to their lives? Have I reflected back their truth as they've seen it? Or not? And so that's where my stress comes from. That's where my sense of responsibility comes from. And then on top of that, yeah, like, we want a lot of people to see it. So, there is context that needs to be established for a foreign audience that you wouldn't need to establish for if we were just showing it in Kibera. So I think the core of the story needs to reflect back Samson's story, Alice's story. They need to say, yes, that's right. And then next is, okay, now that we figured out that part, how do we make sure that other people feel it in the same parts, in their gut, in their chest, and that they're able to intellectually follow what's going on. But I do really trust that sometimes in the sort of the blur and the confusion of verite or observational filmmaking, storytelling, you can get lost in that. So my true north is going deep. My true north is getting to know you better and asking what it is that I'm missing. And that can go against the filmmaker's instincts, because you want, in this case, for example, you want your story to be big and loud, and Samson's not big and loud.
Mhm.
So then that requires that I shift, and that I come in hot with all sort of my excitement and energy, but I don't come in hot with all my preloaded assumptions.
Mhm.
So Cassidy, when making a documentary, one thing what you have to do, especially when you have a subject that's featured, is gaining the trust. So in this case, getting the trust of, like, for instance, of Samson to open up to share what he's going about. Did that needed to take place, or was he aware of what you were trying to do, or he was just going along with the flow? Talk about the trust and the connection between you and the subjects in making this film.
I think Amber can answer this too. So I'll start though.
Mhm.
I mean, so Amber is a gifted storyteller, but we're friends. And so when we show up in spaces, we ground each other a lot. And so the first thing that we do is like, no cameras.
Mhm.
Let's just hang out. Let's just get to know each other. What do you want to know about us? And I like to I feel like, I mean, I want to hang out with us, you know, and so Samson, Amber, and I kind of developed like a rapport.
Mhm.
And it was really important to like kind of like, once you kind of feel the flow happening, then to be like, how do we enshrine this? How do we make it so that this is a safe space, not
Mhm.
just one that feels good, but one where you're like, you know, you can say stop.
Yep.
Um, and because the truth, the worst thing isn't that somebody decides to participate and then pulls out. The worst thing is that they decide to participate, but not wholeheartedly, or it doesn't really feel like this is their own process to share
Mhm.
their story.
Mhm.
And so I think one of the things we're doing is saying, like, forget what you think you know about what films are or filmmaking is. Like, we're here for you.
Mhm.
And and we do that, but then you have to then you that's just the baseline. Then you got to come back to that, and you got to come back to that, because what we're asking Samson to do is extremely vulnerable. You know,
Mhm.
it's vulnerable. And so having that conversation at the front end says, okay, now we're having this conversation. We want to keep coming back to it because it's going to get tough.
Mhm.
And so without that sort of that trust up front, we don't have anything to come back to.
Mhm. Mhm.
And when things get tough, we're going to go in our different directions.
Mhm.
And so that then becomes sort of that moment where somebody who's predisposed to hide,
Mhm.
he starts doing what he does, and then we're naturally going to kind of chase around the story. That's not going to work. So then we have to kind of find a way of like meeting in the middle and seeing where maybe we're getting it wrong, or
Mhm.
why he's uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Yes, and Amber, can you speak a little bit more about that trust issue?
Yeah, especially, I mean, as I think one of the things that I'm really good at, and actually Cassidy's also really good at this too, is empathy, is reading the room and reading a person. And for Samson, even though there was work developed before we got there, it feels like the pressure of disappointing is, he was thinking of Gloria, he's thinking of his team, he's thinking about his community. And at first, the worry about how he's going to represent those things was heavy. But I think what we did, not only in making our relationships with him, our relationship was structured around his empowerment. It was not just around the stop, it was around the go. What do you want to say? What does your community smell like to you, taste like to you, look like to you, feel like to you? And once he felt empowered in his own storytelling, we were his witnesses, we were his pillars, we were the camera, but he could help us shape the story and tell us where to go. And he is he's a naturally introverted person, which Cassidy did struggle with. How do we tell the story? How do you visually tell the story of a quiet person? And we discovered it. And what I feel like I watched because of the role that we took, because of the trust we built, is this arc of like quietness to, we should get it here. The lighting is great. Let me capture this image. Like, he became much more alive in his creativity and his storytelling, and empowered. And again, it felt so good to be a part of fostering that, of adding to that, of fueling that. So yeah.
Yeah. And you know, I feel the sense of the sense of hope of this story coming out, and just such a great title for this film. Uh, Two real quick questions as we wrap up here. One, I know you had one screening of this over in Kenya. Can you tell us about the response the Kenyans had to this film? Either one of you can answer that question.
You want me to do it?
Sure.
Okay. So the room was full. I think that what we were told is there was about 200 or 300 people in the room. People were excited to see their story, excited to see a community member and on the screen. Kenya, and it was shown in Kibera. And if you're familiar with Kibera at all, some of the struggles that came about with the screening were like technical issues, and there was a lot of fluster and a lot of like, how do we get here and how do we get there? So the people who were organizing the screening, unfortunately, were struggling and had a lot of anxiety and pressure, which is part of the reason that I think Cassidy and I would really like to go there, because one of those characters was Samson himself. And we would really, really like to do a screening that just lets him witness himself and not have to think about all of that, and just lets him be honored for the vulnerability in the storytelling, and just witness rather than have to think about all of those things. So again, there's the background where everybody was scrambling for tech, but then once it was actually played in the community, the feedback is that everybody was proud, everybody was glad to see the story on the screen, and felt really good about it.
Well, that's good to hear. Wonderful. And hopefully you'll get to do additional screenings there. So Cassidy, what's next for the both of you? Where are you going to drag Amber off to this time? What do you expect to see
Man,
to you?
you're inside
Anywhere in
my
the world.
brain. Yeah, you're inside my brain because yeah, that's exactly like we're in Kenya, and Gloria goes, if you think this is good, you got to see the work we're doing in Nepal. And we're like, well, tell us about that. And so was it 2 months, 3 months later?
Not
We
even,
I
yeah.
I mean, I'd never been to Africa, and then now I'm on a flight to Nepal, and I'm like, wait, what countries are we gonna fly over? And so
Wow.
we are already in late post-production on kind of a sequel, but it's very much its own project, and the through line, the connective tissue between this film and that is the expressive arts piece.
Mhm.
But they couldn't be any more different from each other. And this piece is about a woman in Nepal. They're using the expressive arts primarily around the survivors of sex trafficking. And one particularly courageous woman who was a survivor of the largest trafficking raid in India's history. She was taken from Nepal when she was 9 and trafficked there, spent over a year in a brothel, and then was brought home and had to face the stigma of not being accepted and now being branded. And despite having every reason in the world to hide and to disappear from the world around her, she took an affirmative step she said, you know what, enough is enough. I'm sharing my story. And she is courageously sharing her story with the whole world. And not only is she a survivor, she's actually going in and rescuing other trafficking victims and doing it in the way that only somebody who's been through it themselves and come out the other side can possibly do. So stay tuned. Stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for that one.
We definitely will stay tuned for that. Well, this has been a delightful conversation. Amber Allen-Peirson and Cassidy Friedman, co-directors of Ambassadors of Hope. Thank you for so much for bringing this film to us and for this conversation. I wish you two all the best.
Thank you.
so
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers for joining us for this important and invigorating conversation. For more information about our upcoming film festival, please visit us at clevelandfilm.org. I'm Eric Siler. Thank you.